We're watching the number 3 in the area, and we'll be watching the red number 3 and a blue number 1, I think, has just picked up the ball. So the number 3's job in the area starts as soon as the other team gets the ball, even if they're not in the area yet. So now that person has got the ball in midfield, our number 3's job is to stay downfield of all the blue players, connect up with the number 1 as soon as she can, and work the number 1 toward the sideline as the number 1 starts making the way to the area. If it wasn't already apparent, the red number 3 is the one at the very top of the screen. So the blue number 1 has just passed it off to another player, and right here, that other player that became the ball carrier, our number 3 could have been holding them in midfield, and it would have been appropriate for our number 3 to continue holding the ball carrier in midfield until somebody comes to relieve her, instead of just waiting for the number 1. But it's not incorrect, but it would have been just as correct to hold that ball carrier until one of her red players came and held her so she could go after the 1. So you see she was looking back at the 1, seeing where she is, and then here she kind of does something that was not correct. When she first looked back at the number 1 was on our number 3's right and toward the right side of the field. And our number 3 let the number 1 get back to the middle of the field and switch sides a couple times, where she could have, the very first time she looked back at her, sees her on the right, she could have just kept her on the right and near the side of the field, which is what she wants to do. But she ends up, so the number 1 ends up getting into the end zone almost in the middle of the field, which is the strongest position for the 1 to enter the end zone, when our 3 could have had her way over to the side of the field. But our number 3 is in the correct position, right up against her and between her and the goal. So she was right up against her, and here she kind of gets a little out of her ideal position. First, she turned earlier than she needed to. As a number 3, if you're close enough to them that they have to turn away from you, you don't even have to start your turn until they're about halfway around. If you start your turn early, you're going to turn yourself out of the way, especially if you have a quick turning horse. And you can still beat them back and catch them on the turn if they're even halfway around. So you're not losing anything, but you don't want to risk getting yourself out of their way by turning so fast. And what she does, she stays between her and the goal, but she's giving up the space that she had. She was right up against her, and now she's given up space, so now there's 3 or 4 feet between her. So here she's kind of just standing, moving back and forth, instead of moving her horse sideways up against that other horse, which would have been much better than turning back and forth. Our number 3 has a very quick turning horse, and she can turn and get back up against them really quickly, but she's not improving her position by making these turns. She's staying off of her and facing away from her when she could have just taken a couple of steps sideways toward the number 1 to be right up against her, which would have been much better. So now the number 1 has got the ball in the end zone, and once again our number 3 is failing to step toward the number 1 and is kind of deciding which way she should turn or when she should turn. And what she should be doing is continually stepping her horse sideways so it's right up against that number 1. So she, once again, she has time to be stepping toward her, but doesn't step her horse toward the number one, and then she reaches up to go, I guess, to catch the ball, even though it hasn't quite been thrown yet. But you want to keep both your hands on your rein so you can maneuver your horse the best you can right up until it's time to reach out to catch the ball. You don't want to put take your hands off the reins and put your arm up to block, to keep them from throwing. You don't want to put your arm up until it's time to reach out and catch the ball after it's been thrown. So there goes the throw. Went probably within reach of our number three's racket, but she doesn't get it, and the opposing number one gets the shot off to the goal. And I actually think she made this one.
Kiki comes up with the ball. She's going to try getting down there. She passes off to Cat Pickin. Cat's going to try helping her get down there. Cat's looking for Kiki to get in there. Kiki's in there. Cat's getting hemmed up by the red Lone Star ladies. Cat passes off to Kiki. Kiki makes a nice catch. Kiki's going to take a shot. Does get a little bit.
We'll be watching the red number 3 in the area, and we'll take a look here. The blue player that is in the middle of the screen has just picked up the ball. The red number 3 is from the left of the screen, is second from the left with that blonde hair flowing out the back. So that's the red number 3 that we're watching. And the blue number 1 that she's going to be defending is the blue player farthest to the right of the screen. So the blue team has just got the ball, so our red number 3 needs to get downfield, and the blue team is going to the right. So it needs to get downfield of all the blue players and connect up with the number 1 as soon as she can. So she realizes she's kind of on the wrong side of the field, and she goes really fast to get up to the number 1 just like she's supposed to. She connects up with the number 1 where the number 1 is on her left, so she should be trying to just work the number 1 over to the left side of the field. And it looks like she's off the screen, but she was getting pretty far in front of the 1, as if she's going to try to keep her from getting into the end zone. And the danger you have from that is that if they turn back to go to the end zone, they're liable to come into the end zone in the middle of the end zone rather than at the side of the end zone. And she'll be off the screen here for a little bit, and we won't know exactly what they're doing. So the blue team loses possession of it for a minute, but then they get it right back. Our red number 3's job hasn't changed. She's still supposed to be marking up the 1, holding her as far as she can, or working her as far as she can to one side of the field. And here when she comes back on the screen, it looks like the number 1 did turn to get back into the end zone and is waiting in the end zone, right in the center of the end zone, looks like. But our 3 is in the excellent position between her and the goal, right up against her. And now the number 1 has got the ball. She's worked herself over to the right side of the field, so that's good for our number 3. And our number 3 is in a very good position right up against her and between her and the goal, and crossways to the line that would run from her to the goal. It's just, I wish she would have both her hands on the reins and just be worried about maneuvering the horse and not be worried about doing anything with the racket, so she can maneuver the horse as much as possible. So she's maintaining up against her, and here as the number one starts to turn away. This time our number 3 is not turning early. So the number 1 is almost, say, a third of the way around the turn, quarter to a third, I guess. And you don't, as a 3, you don't want to turn any more than the 1 turns. So you don't want to be turned farther around the turn than they have gotten. In fact, you can be slightly behind them until they're halfway around. So our number 1 is turning very slowly, but here the number 1 has made it halfway around the turn. Now our number 3 wouldn't have had to even start her turn until now, but she isn't farther along the turn than halfway, so she hasn't turned herself out of position. She's done good that way. And as slow as the number 1 is turning, of course, she has plenty of time to get back in there whichever way she decides to go. The only thing is, if our 3 had turned quickly and our 1 got to this position, the 1 could turn back the other direction and our 3 would be out of the way. And that happens quite a lot, especially when you have number 3s that have really quick turning horses. So she's continuing on around, and our number 3 did well to continue her turn as she turned. So now that our number 1 is crossways to go the other way, our number 3 is also crossways to go. The only problem is, as she was coming around, she didn't have her horse's head turned away from the turn to get his body up against the number 1 as she came back and completed the turn. And in the position, the way she's holding that horse's head, she should be stepping the horse toward the number 1, but the way has that horse's head turned, she's more likely to push his back end away from the number 1 and get the back end out of the way. And you want to get that back end or the whole body up against the horse. We'll see what happens here. Yeah, you can see the horse stepping away from the 1, out of the way, as she turns the horse's nose toward the number 1 and has opened up an area for the 1 to turn toward our number 3. So the last stop, actually before the last stop, as that number 3 was making her turn around, as she's kind of completing her turn, she should have just already been starting. As she's halfway around that turn her horse's head away from the turn and start moving his body up against the number 1. And you want to get your body up against the number 1, not only between him and the goal, but so he can't even get to the middle of the field either. So you want to be forward of them enough that you can keep them from even getting back to the middle of the field. And actually, in the position she is right now, if she'd turn her head to the right, her horse's head to the right, and step him sideways right up against the 1, she'd still be in a good position. But she doesn't really do that. She continues turning toward the number 1, and anytime you turn toward a player, you're going to get behind. So this number 1 has a chance to get past her. I don't know if she'll take advantage of it or not, but that's going to cause our number 3 to be a little bit behind in getting back to block up against her. So once again, now right here, of course, she's has just one hand on the rein, and she's maneuvering the racket up and down, and like she's going to reach out or try to block or hit the racket. And that, I think, is keeping her from being able to have as much control of her horse as she could have. But right at this instant, she could move her horse sideways to the right up against the number 1, and still be in the perfect position. But if she stays off of her, she's given the number 1 an opportunity to turn toward her and get past. And our number 3 is committed all the way to the right. There's room for the number 1 to turn toward her, so the number 1 should turn to the left now that our number 3 is committed all the way to the right. and our number one doesn't take advantage of that weak position our three had gotten into. And now, just because our three is moving around, she's not committed completely to one side, so she has a little bit better chance if the number one wants to try to get past her. She's not completely committed one way or the other, but she would have been in a much stronger position if she were sideways and absolutely up against the number one. Closing that gap between the three and the one is probably the most important thing to do, other than being between them and the goal. So our three is still kind of flailing the racket as if she's going to do something with the racket, and I think any of that takes some of your control away from your horse. But so it looks like the number one is going to try to make a break across the front of the goal, and our three is staying off too much. Right here, to defend against her, she should be getting up against her, which probably means tilting our number three's horse's head to the right so he can get his body pushed up here against the number three and forward enough of the number one so that the number one cannot even get to the middle of the end zone. But our three is staying off and staying back too far. Here, where the one takes off, our number three is intentionally checking back to go for the racket rather than getting up there to stop the horse. So now here she's lost the number one. And once you have lost them, she actually lost them when she checked back for the swing. And once you've lost them, I say the best thing to do is not to follow them like she's doing, but to turn and run directly to between the goalposts, so that if the number one decides to throw at the goal, you might be up to where the ball is going to go by the time the ball gets there. And I say anytime you see that you've lost the number one, turn and go to the middle of the goal. You have a chance of catching it if they make a shot at the goal, and if they don't make a shot at the goal, then you go back to improve your position. So our red number three didn't go directly to the goal, but she stayed off enough away from the number one that when the number one threw it, even though our three couldn't have reached the number one's racket, since she was off of her a little bit, she could reach the ball by the time the ball got there. And she actually did bump the ball and actually caused it to go outside the goalpost. So it caused her to miss that goal by just getting a little bit of bump on it as she was throwing at the goal.
She misses it. Everybody misses it except for Liz. Liz is going to try taking the ball down all by herself, or trying to get it down there, but she gets some serious wood. That was I couldn't tell if that was a backwards catch or she actually got it knocked out of her racket. But Cat comes up with it. Cat's going to start looking for Kiki. Kiki's down there waiting. And Renee and Paige are both trying to get on Cat, but Cat seems to make it out of there. That's the ball up to Kiki. Kiki's going to look for an opening. Tally is going to try hamming up Kiki. Kiki gets an opening. She gets a shoulder. She shoots it.
We'll be watching the red number three in the area, and the blue number three has just gotten possession of the ball in their area. So the blue team's got possession of the ball. So that's when our red number three's job in the area begins, and that is our red number 1 farthest to the right of the screen. I mean, that's red number 3. Sorry, that's who we're watching, the red number 3. And that's her farthest to the right of the screen, and she is already on the number 1. The only thing, she's trying to keep her from getting down the field rather than trying to keep her toward one side of the field. So she's pretty effective at keeping that horse at that number 1 from getting down the field, but she's really doing more work than she needs to. Now she's running her just toward the side of the field, and that's better, but here she starts getting more forward of her to keep her from getting down the field again. And you really should let them go down the field as far as they want. Just keep pushing them closer to the side. So, and you don't even want to push them out. She ends up pushing her out the sideline, and because if you push them out the sideline, what you generally do is get between downfield of them, and so they come back onto the field facing the middle of the field, where they're liable to come back to the end zone in the middle of the field. If you do push them out, don't get downfield of them. Just stay even with them, so when they come back on the field, you still have them held at the side of the field, rather than holding them from getting down the field where they can get toward the middle of the field. So if you push them out, don't get in front of them and keep them from going down the field. Just get back on the field, stay beside them, so when they come back on the field, they can only get a few feet inside the sideline, and you just keep holding them right up against the sideline all the way to the end zone. So she's really just trying to keep her from getting down the field in the end zone, and she's changing sides. She actually has her very close to one sideline, but is giving up that side of the field placement in order to try to prevent her from getting the end zone, which she's not going to be able to do forever. And it's just so much more likely that once they get past you, they'll come into the end zone in the middle, which just makes your job harder once they get to the end zone. If you got them right up against the sideline, your job is a whole lot easier in the end zone. So it looks like she's going to make a break to I guess she's going to get in the end zone, and now she's going to get in the end zone on the other side of the field. So our 3 has been able to keep her from coming in right in the middle, but has made her switch side, or has let her switch sides, and it's really causing our 3 more work than if all she had to do was hold her at the side she is already on. But once she's got in the end zone, our 3 is in a pretty good position. She's pretty much between the 1 and the goal, and pretty much right up against her, and pretty much crossways from a line that run to her, from her to the goal. So there is one of those instances where our number 3 turned too early and turned herself out of position, out of the number 1's way. The number 1 may not have been trying to go towards the goal, but when the number 1 started the turn, our number 3 actually completed her turn, and so when the 1 turned back, our 3 wasn't in her way. So now our 1 has a chance to go towards the goal and maybe get back to the middle of the field. And it looks like our 3 is kind of confused about where she should be or what she should be doing, and in the meantime our 1 has gotten to where there's nobody between her and the middle of the field. Once you get them to either side of the field, even before they get into the end zone, even if they're in midfield, but in midfield or the end zone. Once they're on one, you've got them on one side of the field, you don't even ever want to let them get back to even the middle of the field. So now our number 3 is out of position to prevent her from getting to the middle of the field and prevent her from getting to the goal if she should get a pass and go right to the goal. So the ball in midfield, the ball carriers are having a lot of trouble, so the red team in midfield is doing a good job putting a lot of pressure on them. And they actually make them lose possession of the ball for a second. Now they've got possession again, so our number 3 needs to come back to life and start working on her 1. She's between the 1 and the ball, which is not the way I play, but some people do, and that's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. It's just a weaker defensive position. And whatever she does, the ball is so far out in midfield, it's not real critical what she does back up there in the end zone yet. And so I don't think she's even really too concerned until the ball carrier gets closer to the end zone to maybe get a pass into the number 1. So the ball's getting towards the end zone, and our number 3 has the 1 about in midfield, and then now lets her come towards the other side of the field, which isn't. We want you to keep the number 1 on one side and just make them go closer and closer to the side, and don't ever let them get back to the middle. But anyhow, the number 1 is headed back to the middle of the end zone now. And our 3 is in a pretty good position, and they get the pass off to the number 1. Once the 1 gets the pass, our 3 is between her and the goal. That's good. She's pretty close to the number 1, but not as close as possible. She could be a step or so closer. And she's not quite crossways to a line that runs from her to the goal. She's turned too far away from the goal. And if our 1 would have realized that when she caught the ball, she has a pretty good opportunity, just because she's so much forward of our 3, she could just push her completely around facing the goal and then just shoot. But our number 3 should turn her horse's head to the left, bring her body over more line crossways to the goal, and up against that number 1 right now. The number 1 doesn't really take advantage of that position, and the number 1 actually puts our number 3 in the perfect defensive position. So now the number 3 is between the 1 and the goal, is completely as close as possible to the 1 right up against her, and she is crossways to a line, so she is in the perfect defensive position, and she is there because the number 1 kind of put her there, didn't take advantage of the little bit out of position that she was, and actually placed our number 3 back in her perfect defensive position. And you can see our 3 trying to step closer and closer, keep right up against the number 1, just like she's supposed to. Here, when the number 1 starts a turn, our number 3 doesn't turn early. The number 3 is almost halfway. The number 1 is almost halfway around the turn, and the number 3 is just starting her turn. That's good. And then, as our number 3 gets halfway around the turn, she should already have her horse's head turning to the right, away from the turn, and bringing the horse's body up against the number 1 and trying to connect with her forward. What she does, because her horse's head is turned toward the turn, is that her horse doesn't plant his inside leg and push off of it. He steps back. He doesn't pivot on his outside leg really either. He steps back with his outside leg, then steps back with his inside leg, and then pushes off. So he pushes off to get back up against her a half a step later and from 2 feet farther back. than if he had turned correctly. And he probably would have turned correctly if she had held his head out as he's making that turn. So he stepped back, got back in, and pushed off from a couple feet farther back than he would have if he had left his feet planted. But she is still in a position where she can stop, get between the three and the one, and get in her good defensive position. She's got a big space there, so she needs to be turning that horse's head to the right and pushing his body up towards the number one to close that gap as soon as she can. And she needs to be forward enough of him that he can't even get back to the middle of the field. But she hesitates, actually checked back on the horse a little bit to keep him from getting forward of the horse, like she's not so much concerned about stopping the horse as she is about going after the racket. And she's gotten her horse's body now pushing away from the number one rather than pushing toward the number one with the horse's body. And even though actually our number three had gotten her horse positioned so much crossway, so much turning away from the goal rather than exactly crossways aligned with the goal, that a good number one could have actually beat her on this turn. So the number one is trying to make a turn. Our number three, even though she started at a not very strong angle because she's a little bit out of position when she starts her turn, she isn't turning early, and now the number one about halfway around the turn, and it's time for our number three to go ahead and start at least her turn away. So as she's now, our number three is halfway around the turn, and she should have, right about this position, start pulling her horse's head over to the left, but pushing his body continuing up to the right. It looks like the number one is checking up and maybe starting to turn back, so our number three maybe just makes sure she doesn't want to continue turning to the right if the number one is turning back to the left, so she should be turning slow enough that she can change her position as the one changes her direction. And the one didn't immediately turn back to the right, but then she does start turning back to the right, so she's already started her turn, and it's time for our three to start her turn. And she is starting to turn. Still not not turning quicker than the number three, so she's still in a good position there. I meant not quicker than the one. Okay, so here when the one now takes a break, our three is in a good position to get up against her, connect with her, and keep her horse from getting to the middle of the field or to the goal. She has her horse's head just slightly tilted to the left, and if she's going to go a little bit forward, that's okay before she comes flat up against him, but she needs to close that gap that has been created between her and the number one. So as she's making her jump forward, she should also be moving her horse sideways to get up against the number one. And it looks like she's reaching out with a racket, has given up just directing her horse, and is reaching out with a racket as if to go after the racket. And I think it's better to stop the horse rather than to try to go for the ball. But this time it has scared the number one that she's not going to continue on, and she starts to make another turn. Okay, the number one's about halfway around. Our number three is not turning early, just like she's supposed to. So that's good. And as the number three just stopped when she saw she was turning faster than the one, so that was good. Although when she stopped here, she stops and stands, and she should be improving her position. She is already between the one and the goal. That's where she's supposed to be. She's not as close as possible to the number one. So while she has stopped here, she should be stepping her horse backwards right up against the number one. If she gets up against him, then she can turn her horse sideways. But what she needs to be doing, as soon as she comes here and stops, and while she's waiting to see what that number one is doing, she should be closing that gap between herself and the number one. But she didn't close it, and the number one actually turned toward her. So that's lucky break for the number one. She had enough room to turn toward our three, so she should be able to get past, but she hadn't made our three commit to one side, so our three is still in a pretty good blocking position. And once again, the one is scared enough to turn away again. This time our three isn't turning faster than the one, but is turning a little sooner than she actually needs to. The number one not quite halfway around, and the number three is a little bit farther behind, but not quite as far around as the number one. Still not in a bad position though. And this time, then she continued her turn actually faster than the one turn, so she's a little bit out of position, and her weakness would be for the number one to quickly turn to the number one's right, because now our number three is committed almost all the way to to that right, and if our number one turned right, she'd be coming around to the left side of our number three. So as she has turned a little bit too far, what she should be doing is turning her horse's head a little bit to the left, stepping him sideways backwards and towards the number one to get back between the number one and the goal and close the gap between her and the number one. And right here again, she just stood there rather than stepping toward the number one. As the number one came around, she had our three had another opportunity to continue stepping toward her. This reaching around in front to swing at a racket looks like it may not be legal. If she's just holding a racket up there to block, that's okay legal-wise, but I don't think it's strategically good. I think it's better to have both your hands on the reins at this point so you can maneuver the horse exactly where you want him to be, and only take your hands off the reins to reach up to catch the ball after it's been thrown. So now, since she reached across there and just kind of hung out rather than kept stepping her horse toward the number one, she's gotten a little bit of space between her and the number one, and she's drifted forward where the number one may be able to turn toward her and get around her on the left. Once again, she's backing her horse a little bit, maneuvering around while she has one hand on her racket, kind of facing and looking at her, and has not really improved her position any, has space between them, and now has committed herself completely to the right when the number one horse is already facing all the way to the left. So it's a pretty good opportunity for the number one to just jump forward and get past her. Where even at this position, after she had gotten out of this far out of position, if our number three had both hands on the reins, she could still step her horse backwards and sideways to the right and still stop this number one, even though she had gotten that far out of position. So sure enough, the number one makes the blast pass, tries to make the blast pass. But even now, if our number three would, I think she has time, even at this position, to turn her horse's head to the right, make his body come around to the left, up against the number one, and keep the number one from getting towards the goal. But she's not going for that route. So right about here, the number three has pretty much lost position on the number one. And at this point, I think it's better for the number three, instead of running forward and just following the number one, maybe swinging at the racket, instead of doing that, I would think at this point for her to turn her horse directly to the middle of the goalposts and run directly toward the middle of the goalposts. By the time the one gets a shot, the goalpost would look open, but hopefully by the time the ball gets there, our number three would be there to possibly interfere with it. And if the number one doesn't take the shot, you're already between them and the goal, and then you just improve your position from there.
Cat's trying to get away from Renee. Renee's all over Cat, making her turn. That's what a good two does. She makes the one turn. Makes her opponent turn, and Cat is looking for Kiki. Kiki is getting pushed all over the field by Tally. Tally is doing such a good job as the three right now. Cat's going to look for Kiki. She's going to tell her, move, Kiki, move. Oh, and she gets the ball knocked out of her racket by Paige. And she comes back up with it. Cat's got an amazing job to keep her head down and go for the ball. Renee takes a big swing. Cat's going to try getting around Renee, but it's going to be pretty hard to do that. Renee can turn and burn on that horse better than anybody. Cat's got a tough time with Renee there. Cat's almost getting double teamed. Liz is trying to do what she can. Kiki is getting some good coaching over here by Kelly. Kiki's just trying to get that horse to turn to get it to go forward. Turn to drive 30 seconds. You're going to have to make your shot, make it count. You still got some time, Kiki. Take your time, it's not over yet. Make it count. There you go. Yep, she puts it up.
We'll be watching the blue number three this time, and the black number three has just gained possession of it in the far end zone. So they'll be wanting to go to the other end where the blue will be defending. And we can't see the blue three yet. Okay, there they're on the screen. And the black number one is the farthest player over to the right of the screen. And the blue number one, the blue number three that we're going to be watching is third from the right and is pointed downfield, heading out there, chasing to go after the number one like she's supposed to. Now her job is to stay downfield of all the black players and connect with the number one as soon as possible and just keep pushing that number one over to the side, toward the side of the field, as they get to the end zone. So the number 1 will have to go into the end zone at the very side of the field. So there, a 3 goes up to get downfield of all the players. Now she's downfield of the 1 and all the other players and off the screen. And now that she's back on the screen, we can see that she's not trying to just keep that number 1 towards the side of the field. She's getting in front of her to try to maybe keep her from going and getting down to the end zone. But that is not correct. She should have stayed back beside her and just ridden beside her all the way down the field, just slowly pushing her toward the sideline. And so she's switching sides. The number 1 is starting out now kind of on the left side of the field, but as the number 3 is switching sides in front of her, she points her back towards the middle of the field and then towards the side, to the left side again, without holding her anywhere, and really has no control over it all, because she's trying to stop her from getting down the field instead of just staying beside her and trying to push her over towards the edge of the field. So now they're off screen again, and for a little while we'll see when they come back on the screen if our number 3 has gotten on one side and trying to hold her on the side of the field as she gets towards the end zone or not. Okay, there they're back on the screen, and not only has our number 3 not stayed downfield of all the players, she's gotten behind. She's also on the side. She's let the black player get towards the middle of the field toward her. So she hasn't stopped her from getting down the field, and she's allowed the black player to enter the end zone right in the middle of the end zone if she wants to. And our number 3 has gotten behind, isn't forward of her anymore. So then when the black player, the black number 1, checks up to turn to go maybe more towards the field, but anyhow, she had checked up, it gave our blue player another opportunity to just continue forward and get forward of the black number 1 where she belonged. But instead of getting downfield of her, when the black player turned to the right, our player, our number 3, turned to the right also to switch sides, which has put our blue number 3 that we're watching even farther behind. And once you're behind, there's really not much else you can do. I told you the number 3's job in the end zone starts as soon as the other team gets the ball in midfield. But if you don't do your job in midfield, you may not even get a chance to maneuver against them in the end zone. So here the number 1 is about to catch the pass, and our number 3 is just almost a horse length behind, and the number 1 is headed right to the goal, and there's really nothing that our number 3 can do, unless by some miracle the number 1 would miss the pass or something like that. But she doesn't miss the pass. She hangs right onto it and shoots right at the goal. I think she makes this one, and the 3 just didn't bother the 1 at all.
Chrissy puts it way out in front for Heather. Heather can't come up with it. Libby comes up with it. She's going to take a bounce over to the 30. On the far side where it's less bumpy, less chopped. Libby's helmet falling down in her face. She can't quite see where she's going. And Janelle is trying to push off Stephanie. Now Libby's going way faster than everybody else.
Okay, we'll be watching the blue number 3, and here's the blue number 3 coming out of the back. And we haven't been talking about them until the other team gets the ball, but in this case, we will. Right here, the balls come out the back. Both the threes turn, and it is obviously easier for the black number 3 to get to it than the blue number 3. But the blue number 3's job is still to go all out to try to keep that black number 3 from getting the ball. And she should be doing that by racing up to get up against the number 3, slightly forward, and push on her. And you can see here as the ball comes out, our blue number 3 doesn't go all out to get up beside the number 3 and push on her like she should be doing. So she was just kind of hanging off and actually looking at the black number 3 to maybe see if she's going to get it or not, instead of going all out and getting up against her to try to keep her from picking it up. If she had gone all out, and if she hadn't checked up to watch what the black number 3 did, when the black number 3 ended up with the ball, our blue number 3 would have been right up against the black 3 and would actually be holding her in midfield. And if the blue number 3, or if a number 3 is holding the ball carrier in midfield, that is the time when they should not go to get downfield of all the other players. They need to continue holding that player until one of their teammates come to relieve them. But since she was so far back and didn't really connect, she wasn't holding her. So then she has to make the decision. She wasn't holding her in midfield, so by my guidelines, as soon as the other team gets the ball, if she's not holding the ball carrier in midfield, she should have been going down there to get in front of all the other players and connect with the number 1 as soon as possible. But she lingered on following behind the number 3 for several strides before she breaks off and heads over toward the number 1. If she had been holding the black number 3 and a teammate could have relieved her, so our blue number 3 could go get the number 1, the ball carrier would be still held in midfield, and our number 3 wouldn't have to race to try to get in front or catch up to the number 1. But now she has to race to catch up to him. She didn't start up there as soon as she could have, and it's just a race to try to get what she should be trying to do is get forward of the black number 1 and connect with the black number 1 and push her towards the side of the field. Getting forward of her is the first thing she needs to worry about, and it looks like she may actually have a possibility of doing that. We'll see how it works out. But if you can't get forward of them, you just there's no maneuvering you can do. You're just chasing them, just following them really down the field as they go and shoot the goal. So as they're racing up to the 30-yard line, it looks like our number 3, maybe that's as fast as she could have gone. I thought she could have gotten forward of her by the time she was ready to catch the pass, had gone across the line. But she hadn't. It looks like she is just now getting almost even with her. Still a little bit behind, but just almost even with her. And if I thought she could catch up, but if she couldn't catch up, and if she knew she couldn't catch up by following her or running the way she's going, she should have headed directly towards the goal. Once you've lost them, go to the goal, even if they haven't gotten the ball in the end zone yet. But here I thought she could have caught up and got forward of her before the pass. And about that last time, our blue number 3, about the time the black number 1 caught the ball, our blue number 3 quit going toward the black number 1. And from the time the player caught the ball until right about here, our number 3 has been the same distance from the black number 1, or maybe even a little farther than she was when she caught the ball. But our blue number 3 should have been continuing to get up against her. And if she had gotten up against her at this point, even though she's trying to overhand throw that, I don't know if they're going to count it good or not, but if you were actually having to defend one of these, being right up against them is about as good a defense as you can get. But our blue number 3 just really continued going straight, and the black player actually turned away some, maybe to get that space where she could make that throw. But regardless, our blue number 3 should have just been continuing to try to work herself up against her and close that gap and get right up against the black number 1, whether she threw the goal or not. If she wasn't able to throw that kind of goal and had to check and turn around, our 3 would have been in a better place to defend her, even if she makes some other maneuver.
Shot the back. Livy comes up with the Lyrics. Knew that her teammate was going to come up with that ball. She's already heading down there. Livy passes off to Lyric. And Livy tries.
We'll be watching the red number 3, and the blue number 3 has just caught the ball. And she's standing right next to the red number 3 that we're watching. And you could say that the red number 3 is holding the ball carrier in midfield, which would mean she should continue holding that player instead of going to get downfield of all the blue players and could connect up with the number 1 and so forth. However, you only hold them in midfield until you're relieved by another player, or until that player turns away from you. And here, as soon as she catches the ball, she's turning away. So our number 3 shouldn't stay back with the blue number 3 of the ball carrier anymore. As soon as that blue number 3 starts to turn away, our red number 3 should start looking for the 1 and getting downfield of the 1. But she goes towards the 3 really more than she should. Finally, about here, she looks back for the number 1 and starts over towards the number 1 like she should be going. And she should stay downfield of all the players, connect with the number 1 as soon as possible, and work the 1 towards the sideline. She had the number 1 on the left side of the field. She contacted her on the right, and she should have just continued staying on her right side and pushing her over towards the left sideline, rather than getting in front of her and trying to keep her from getting in downfield at all. But she does try to keep her from getting down the field, makes her turn once, gets up against her again. Now this time, since she was heading toward the middle of the field, as the number 1 tries to avoid or get past the number 3, she may have to turn back toward the side where the number 3 wants her. So this time, getting in front of her isn't nearly as bad as it was when you already had her on the side. But she stops her again. The number 1 doesn't turn away and try to come back to this other side. And here she finally is starting to make a break, and she's making a break toward now to the right side of the field. So our red number 3 should just continue getting up against her and just continuing to push her towards the right side of the field now, so that when she gets into the end zone, she is very as close as possible to the sideline. So our number 3 is doing a pretty good job pushing her in. She's actually getting more in front of her than she needs to just be pushing her to the side of the field, but she's ended up doing a very good job of getting her very close to the sideline as she gets finally now completely into the end zone. So the 1 is completely in the end zone looking for a pass, and our 3 has her held in almost the ideal position, right in that, or the right side of the field, right in the corner by the 30. So they do give the pass to her, and then our 3 is in a very good position. She's got her held right in the corner, where if this play had continued, our 3 had a good chance of forcing a change of possession and getting the ball. But something happened, and they blew a whistle, so they stopped the play right here.
There should still be some meatball subs up there for lunch. Please support concession, so we can get this fence fixed up. Finally have a good fence to oh, big swing. Oh, big swings. Paige is trying to get some good swings. Cat's looking to give it off to Kiki.